Greetings everybody, this is Topaz. This is going to be the first of many runs that I'll be doing of Sacred cards. Now this first run is me re-experiencing the game to its fullest. The plan is to take full advantage of the spells and traps that I may have not used in the past, along with using better sacrifice fodder for tribute summoning, since this game has a lot more of a simplified battle process. And then because extra summoning doesn't exist in this game except for rituals, that is something that I'll be leaning into a little bit as well. Now if you've ever played this game or not, the monsters in the game have a element corresponding to them, whether it's fire, water, earth, lightning, and the first tree is a circle of all the things that are essentially super effective to one another, and then a secondary tree where it's like light, dark, dream, fiend. So not only are you trying to beat over your opponent's monsters with higher attack, but you have to worry about you or your opponent having the advantage element to your monsters, and even if they don't have enough attack power to defeat it, it's an automatic KO. For a normal playthrough, this is where you're going to be visiting a lot, as this is where you save your game. Since it's an old GBA game, basically when you lose, you just have to reset the game and go back to your last save. So right now, the story is set in Battle City. Kaiba is establishing that there is a tournament going on where duelists can sign up and are given locator cards. You, as the player, essentially being inserted into Yugi's party, and events from the show take place roughly the same, but because you're the protagonist, you're the one that has to do the majority of the heavy lifting or successfully winning certain battles. Now, the idea is you have to travel across the map and fight certain key characters from the show to get their locator cards, and the game itself has a pretty solid system when it comes to controlling your power by means of having a point system to your deck. So your deck will have a certain numbered value, and it'll go up every time you defeat any duelist. It'll go up more if you beat key characters, but essentially all cards have a certain cost to be applied to your deck. Your deck has to be 40 cards, period, and all cards have a corresponding cost to them. So the more wins that you get, the higher your deck count value is, and therefore the better cards you can put in your deck over time. Right now we have to go and talk to the characters kind of scattered about this small courtyard, but I'm also checking out certain areas as well. The graveyard that I just went to will be a key area. The guards here are protecting the Kaiba Corp building. This is, of course, Rex. He is one of the main characters that we'll be interacting with. You have Bones, who is located in the graveyard later. He will actually be the first locator card that we get. That sound that just played is actually a notification sound letting you know that progress has been made. This is, of course, Weevil. This is Grandpa's toy shop that is referenced through the game in dialogue. This is a location that you'll be going to a few times. Next is Mako Tsunami. Tristan is here, located outside of your house. He's actually a really easy trainer to fight when you want to grind for points for your deck and for early cash. Next is My Valentine. Once you've talked to everybody, the leaving of the screen will trigger the event. And after this cutscene plays, basically you're allowed to start the actual progression of the game. Hey man, I know you want to be the Duelist King, but you just can't phase through anybody you want. How rude. Anyway, so this game does have a map system. You have your town, you have the card shop, and then you have the art gallery. So, card shop is pretty straightforward. You go in and you can talk to the merchant. He will sell you a variety of cards early on, and it'll grow over time. And then you have the code system, where if you had an old Yu-Gi-Oh card of that time period, there would be a unique number that you could enter at the bottom of the card, and that would physically unlock the card for you in-game. The art gallery is a location you go to, but it'll only be open later for story purposes. And yeah, Bakura is waiting outside. He is a duelable character, but it's one of the few in the game where it's a one-time deal. The same could be said about this guard. He gives you a bunch of cash if you manage to beat him, but it's a one-time fight. And then this is the battle simulator. So Kaiba Corp has basically made a machine that you can duel over and over and over, and it gives you 5 for your deck capacity, but the thing is that it's a much harder fight, so it's only worth it if you want the 5 grand that it gives you when you win. So I went ahead and loaded my current save, where I've done a lot of pre-grinding, where I haven't made any progress and it's just been Tristan. So if we go into status, you'll see that we have a deck capacity of 2,500, and my duelist level is 372. This means that any card that costs 372 or lower can be put in my deck. And the 2,500 implies that I'd be able to put a 40 card deck together within that cost. Now, Rex is not available at the moment, because I actually need to go and fight Bones, but before I fight Bones, I have to fight one of his lackeys. So by pressing right on the Game Boy, you'll start a duel with somebody. And this is the ante-window, where you can pick a card at varying costs in order to basically bet a card so that you can get a card from your opponent. And a lot of times these could be helpful cards, sometimes they're not that great, but it does help provide with not only cards that might be useful to sell later, but it could also just be an important part of your deck. So at first, it's just about beating your opponent, and one of the things that you can do to make the process a lot smoother is find things like the Toadmaster, who summons an additional body, basically for free, so that you can tribute it for a bigger monster to make the fights faster. So at the corner, you'll see that it has like a 1 or a 2, and that's just how many tributes it needs in order to summon. I used Monster Reborn, which it's not even really Monster Reborn, it's more like Monster Reincarnation, but only for your opponent's graveyard, in order to give myself an extra body, so that I'd be able to tribute and bring that card out effectively cheaper. So this is pretty much the first step to moving the story forward. You'll be having a fight with Bones, and as the first major duelist, he is still really easy to fight. but obviously, because of the grind, I have a lot more accessible cards available to me. So, one cool mechanic in the game is that you still can do what other games can do as well, which is defense baiting. If you set a monster in defense position when it's summoned, then it'll have an R on it that basically means it's not revealed. And as long as it's not revealed and it's in defense position, they'll attack it no matter what. So it allows you to bait them out and get some burn damage, and it's really useful turn 1, since you can't attack yourself. Then you have Torrential Tribute and Acid Trap Hole, which are defensive cards, but they've basically been dumbed down to where if your opponent attacks you, Torrential Tribute will just knock out every creature they own. And then Acid Trap Hole will just destroy whatever monster attacks if it's a certain attack value or lower. Then I have the Hand card, which basically just fissures whatever creature is on the field. At this point, we have to head to the Choice Shop, but we'll be coming back and fighting him later. Talking to Joey will help move things forward, but you still can do a one-time fight with him. He's pretty much a pushover, as you would kind of expect from like the TV show version of him. However, it is cool that he does use a couple of cards that are, you know, very Joey. Now, the dark tinted cards are your effect monsters. Skella Angel specifically just allows me to draw an additional card. And then the paler ones are your normal monsters. Now, the toddler-looking one at the bottom actually just paralyzes all monsters, making them to where they cannot move or be tributed or anything. And then there's an example of a monster being KO'd by the super effective nature system. So the blue card is the ritual card I was referring to earlier, where as long as you have a specific creature on the field and then sack 2 creatures, you can activate it, giving you a big monster, usually. These ritual summon monsters are actually called Divine, which basically makes it to where they have no weakness and no super advantage. So if you do manage to summon them, they basically have to fall under the effects of a spell or trap card, or have to be beaten by force. There is no other way around it. And essentially, they're the best card that you can possibly summon. Now, in this game, Raigeki and Dark Hole basically still function exactly the same. Dark Hole would just destroy everything, and then Raigeki would destroy everything on your opponent's side of the field. Now, a really interesting thing to keep in mind is that there is actually a limited system in this game. Cards are limited based on how powerful they are. So I'm able to run 1 Pot of Greed, but that's it, along with 1 Raigeki. Now we are going back and we're going to fight this character. And this is basically just to get a little bit more experience and practice in with the deck. That is a perfect example of attacking into a monster and it basically backfiring. Now every duelist has a predetermined deck, and you have to learn what those cards are. For the most part, certain characters will basically have a theme of monsters that they'll run, and so one process of playing the game is to learn whatever they run so that you can either have the better cards for that fight in both attack and defense values and the element that they're weak to. If you run an element that their deck is weak against, then more often than not, they won't really be able to attack into the monster, and you'll be able to just defeat whatever monster they summon. Okay, cool. That's when I got that card. Yeah, that's a 289 cost. It's basically considered one of the most valuable cards in the game just because of how high its value is. And for the entire duration of the game, I'm always using the same card to ante with. But I'd always noticed the tiger chick, and I was always curious where it came from, so it's really cool to see that it came from that specific duel really early on. Now, he happens to have thunder, and I run some aqua stuff. So it's kind of unfortunate, but I'm able to recover quickly. And that's the main reason why you want to run monsters that can multiply. They're basically not pulling copies of themselves from the deck, they're just manifesting out of thin air. And this allows you to use them as tribute fodder really early, and even late into the game. So yeah, there is a third brother, and his fight basically goes exactly the same as the last two. So, with him defeated, I go ahead and move on to the next part of the story. But the reward I get from him is actually pretty cool. It is actually Jinzo. Jinzo basically allows me to trigger his effect and just blow up my opponent's side of the board, destroying all traps that they may have set. Now, Bones has been kicked out of his grave, so we gotta find out what's going on. This is basically one of the rare card hunters. It's a small fight, but it sets you up for a theme that'll be going on in the future, where when you start a fight, a field spell is basically already affecting the game, and I believe this one is Yami. So, certain monsters have a home field advantage here, like my King Fog. I go ahead and simply just do the defense bait to see what he plays, and then play like normal in order to, beat him to submission. Now, there are some fights that I won't be showing, like the grind fights or the extra fights I end up picking up along the way, just the key ones. And one thing I would like to point early on is that all of your matches are basically predetermined by the computer. Whatever your hand is and whatever you draw is already determined basically as soon as the last match ends. And one thing you have to keep in mind is that if you go into a fight and it's not in your favor, or maybe it's impossible for you to win based on what's going on, it's best to just go fight a weaker duelist to reset it, so that the next time you duel, it'll be a completely separate setup. And with a new slate, this should help you win the fight. And of course, if that doesn't work, then you simply retry until something either succeeds, or maybe you edit the deck in order to allow yourself to have a fresh setup that way, and new cards. With the rare hunter defeated, Bones basically thanks us, and now we can move on to Rex, since now we're considered a worthy opponent. Now you notice that he does set a back row. Sometimes they set cards basically to exist. There are some cards that they never actually activate, and this happens pretty commonly in the middle part of the game. Once you're halfway through the game, the CPU will actually start using more cards, like burn cards, or certain things that will actually buff monsters, and then by the late part of the game, you'll actually encounter your opponents actually using battle traps as well. Now, the 2 Tribute Necrophere that's sitting in my hand, I don't think I ever actually use its effect, just because of how slow it is, but it's able to steal one of your opponent's monsters permanently. The problem is that the effect itself is inherently slow, and it's only ever useful at the very end of the game when your opponent happens to have decently powered monsters worth owning. Now that we have our second locator card, we're simply going to go back to the map selection screen and we're going to go to the park. In this location, we'll be going after Weevil. The thing about Weevil is that you actually have to defeat the 3 followers that are with him. There are several duelists in this location, however the main 3 is just these 3. And all 4 of these characters basically do the same thing, where they have insects and beasts and stuff like that, and then a predetermined field card that buffs those creatures. Now when it comes to battle traps, the far left is where you kind of want to put them. However, this is the location you want your torrential tribute to be, because from right to left is how your battle traps activate. So if you have torrential tribute on the right side, it'll trigger before anything else, and so that's how you would want to set it up if you wanted to delete a whole bunch of your opponent's monsters if they happen to already have more than one, or if they only have one, then you might want to put the acid trap hole to the furthest. That way it triggers first. $1,500 or less is how that triggers. The other battle traps basically function the same thing, where they have a certain attack value or less that they trigger on. Bear Trap, of course, being one of the better ones, as most things that you would face wouldn't ever cross that threshold. Now here the best way to activate Pot of Greed, of course, is to set Torrential Tribute, set Pot of Greed, and then activate it. Now, of course, you know, you can take cards out of your hand and place monsters, which is a really neat addition, at least in this game, compared to Forbidden Memories. Revival Gem is basically the best card in the game, in my opinion, because its base attack value is higher than most anything that your opponent would ever actually summon, and you get 2 of them. So not only do you get the double whammy of 1500, but as long as you've got something on the side to attack and destroy a monster, then you're able to do essentially 3000 a turn, which can speed up duels by a lot. Now I do fight the 3rd one, and then I come across the Afro character. He's looking for Yugi, and if you happen to tell him where he is, then he'll tell you where Mai's location is, but you have to unlock that spot first before being able to fight Mai. After doing a lot of walking around and checking out this suspicious looking character, I finally go back and fight Weevil. He will be the next locator card, and the next step in the story progression. At this point, the game basically has a small curve thrown at you, where if you don't meet a certain threshold on your monsters, then you won't really be able to win this fight, because 900 is a pretty common baseline for the lower cost cards. Once you reach 1000, the cards get a little bit more expensive and therefore harder to have in your deck. And in this situation, it just shows you how even if you meet that threshold, like a 900, that 1910 is pretty much the ace monster that you have to get around. And with him defeated, he happens to give us his ace monster, the Insect Queen, so graciously. But the thing about this fight is that it's not like a traditional fight. You get the locator card, and you beat him, but you actually have to beat him 2 more times. And I didn't realize this until I had to be reminded, which was, I don't know, kind of funny. Because some of the ways that you figure out this game is just by constantly running around and talking to people and just kind of mashing buttons till you kind of figure things out. So that was one experience that I had forgotten about this game, and Weevil was a pretty hard reminder of it. By the 3rd defeat, he finally accepts the fact that he did truly lose, and we can move on. Then we have to head to the card shop in order to start the Dark Magician copycat fight. This happens in the show where essentially Yugi is lured into a basement-like dungeon, and you have to fight this character. And he also wields the Dark Magician. The fight isn't too difficult. Basically the gimmick is that you're both chained to the location, and the giant saw blades to the sides are basically just supposed to attack whoever loses. Now, in the show and in here, of course, you know, you free the other person, and so, you know, there's no gruesome death or anything, but he starts out with Yami, as usual, as he's essentially a part of a dark gang called the Ghouls, and it's a series of fights that you pretty much have to do over and over and over, and they all run Yami. So if you happen to run monsters that are benefited by this field spell, it's a great way to have advantage. But it's also a way for you to understand and kind of know what to expect in future fights. And here's the moment of truth. The Queen of Autumn leaves, comes out onto the field, and I sack 2 creatures to activate Cosmo Queen's ritual, and bam! Cosmo Queen in the flesh. A divine monster who is a wizard, who is buffed by the field. So, thanks. I don't care who you are, that sounds like it hurts. So yeah, Merrick, who is a shady character in the background, is manipulating people's minds and using them as servants. This is just one fight that you'll be doing. I decided to browse a little bit through the shop and then move on. The shop is pretty vast. As you progress through the game, more and more will become available, and yes, even the ritual monsters themselves can be bought. The problem is that they're too expensive. You can simply summon them like a normal tribute summon mon. I just never decide to run any of them because 255 is a very tall order, and it would only be worth it if you grinded out a huge surplus of points, or if you ran a whole bunch of cards that were of lower value, but I prefer to have stronger cards in general. We head back to Grandpa's toy shop, and this is where we meet a new character who essentially has just introduced himself as a duelist who is kind of okay at dueling and is essentially trying to get on everybody's good side. Now the map opens up a bit more, so we have the bridge and the building. The building is where you're going to find Mai, and we're going to go ahead and do a duel against her. Mai's automatic field is Mountain, So it's useful against thunder monsters, and I believe dragons and winged beast monsters. Oh, how about that? I guess I get to eat my words. With her defeated, we're gonna go inside and talk to Joey. Being caught in the act of playing arcade games, he has to make a break for it in order to try to catch up in locator cards. Now, this place does have multiple floors with other duelists that you can face. However, you don't have to. Next is the aquarium, where you have to face Mako. Now, Joey and Mako do get into a fight, and then you have to fight all of the duelists in this area, besides Joey, in order to get access to Mako. And then, of course, Mako being a water character, he's going to have the water field spell that buffs all of his ocean-based creatures. Now, this is obviously very useful for us because we happen to have things that would benefit from that, like the Toad Summoner and the Slimes. And wouldn't you know it, he happens to have a torrential tribute of his own. So you can press left and check on your opponent's side of the board. And he does have 3 cards in hand, which is why I was so shocked because he didn't play anything. And it is possible for them to not cheat. They can actually run out of things to play. And Monster Reborn, of course, being like a huge bonus right now, because it allows me to have something strong enough to handle his stuff. With the Legendary Fisherman defeated, he gives us the Legendary Fisherman. How ironic. So with him defeated, we'll now move on to the next part of the story. We go to Grandpa's toy shop, and when we're informed that Joey had shown up and basically acted strange by leaving with Taya. We're entering the part of the arc where ghouls essentially have attacked and have taken over the city, and we're going to have to find information on the whereabouts of Joey and Taya. And when he means clues, he means go and fight 5 specific ghouls in order to trigger an event in the park. We go ahead and make our way up to this spot here, and we're going to be fighting this character. The second one is in the graveyard. Third one is at the art museum. Then it's bridge, and then we go to the aquarium. We find Keith possessed in the park. He had just defeated Weevil, and now we have to do our first of 2 fights against him. With him defeated, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the story, which requires us to go to the card shop again, and we're going to be dealing with the masked duo. Right now, the clue that we need to get to Joey and Tay is finding the location based on the dual discs that they wear. Now, Seto is the only one who actually has privy to that information. We don't really know where he is at the moment, so tracking down Mokuba is our best bet, and so we have to fight these guys in order to free him so that we can get Seto Kaiba's location. As far as I know, it doesn't make any difference which one you fight. They both have the same field spell and should have similar, if not the exact same deck. With us being victorious, we're going to talk to Mokuba and find out that Seto Kaiba is currently at the art museum. After a brief conversation with Merrick, of course. The weird thing about this game is that I feel like Kaiba kind of fits the role that he's been assigned, which is just kind of the I'm better than you kind of attitude, but at the same time it's like maybe slightly downgraded from how pompous he is from the show, but Mokuba seems to be a lot ruder than normal. Like, In the show, he has a little bit more care in a way for human life and stuff like that. And his actions seem to be just a little bit more stiff. Moving on, we're at the pier, and this is the second fight that we have to do with Keith. Pretty much nothing has changed, and unlike the very beginning of the anime for this, where you fight Keith essentially inside of a warehouse and everything going on with the puzzle, he's just an extra character that you have to encounter. So here, the back row kind of scares me, and I was just trying to make sure that I got rid of whatever might hinder my ability to play, because I can play the Revival Jam, but if it was like another Tempest or an Acid Trap Hole, then I would be in trouble. So I was weighing my options. This is a rare instance where the enemy actually doesn't provide any additional cards and just focuses on playing with one monster entirely. So yeah, at this point I'm going to set Torrential Tribute just to get rid of the monster that he summoned so that I can control the board now. This is definitely a cool moment for Monster Reborn, as an opponent has actually brought out a pretty strong monster for me to steal this time around. With Keith out of the way, we're now going to head to the docks in order to face a mind-controlled Joey. In the anime, this fight of course goes very differently, as it's up to Yugi to fight Joey and snap him out of his confusion, but as a turn of events for, the protagonist, Joey will fight Yugi, and Yugi will fail, so we have to step in and fight him. But at the end of the day, Yugi still snaps him out of his mind control state. If I remember correctly, this is the only fight where an NPC actually used not only essentially more than one burn spell, but as many burn spells as he does, including a burn spell right here, where it's 1,000 points of life damage. Also, I love Joey's speaking, because I think twice so far he's put Yugi's name first and then mine second, so it's almost like he's saying Yugi bad. Alright, well, now that everybody's back together, we still have to make sure that Joey gets his last locator card, as the rest of us have finally caught up. Now we're going to go to the aquarium and deal with a side encounter involving a Hollywood actor and Mai. This man is under the influence that Mai is supposed to marry him, and so what she does is she dismisses him, but simply says if you manage to beat the protagonist, then she would actually go through with marrying him. But, of course, she does this wager knowing that we're a much stronger duelist and would be able to win. Merrick's sister is currently waiting for us at the art gallery. So at this point in the story, she is supposed to give an Egyptian god card to Yugi, Kaiba, and the third one is already in possession by Merrick. However, in this situation, because again we're the protagonist, we have to duel her as a test of worthiness, and then we have to duel Kaiba in order to gain possession of Obelisk the Tormentor. Now, Kaiba would be the one using this card, but at this point, everything's pretty much been shifted around so that we, as the main character, are more of the center of the story. Even though that seems the way it's been so far, the story itself actually shifts really hard at this point, because not only do we gain the Egyptian god card, but the final battles at the end also change in order. I do understand that maybe it's a little boring to just see Revival Jam anytime it's in my hand, but it pretty much is the strongest card in the game because it has an extremely high stat line of 1500 attack, and by having 3 copies in your deck, you basically have 6 copies. It is an exceptionally good card to go for both just whittling your opponent down as quickly as possible. It's great tribute fodder, and even if I do like a water-themed deck, this card is still going to be in it because it's just that impactful. And just for flavor, I don't have to go for Cosmo Queen anymore because I do have some really strong baseline cards, but it's for the fun of it. I love bringing out Cosmo Queen. I kept Cosmo Queen's Ritual Summon card and the Queen of Autumn Leaves pretty much until the very end of the game, just because it was a lot of fun to see. It was so nice to actually use the ritual system. Even if I only had just one ritual card in the deck, it was always gratifying to grab it, play it, and just win games. So I think this does an interesting description of the old days of mages and monsters and stuff like that, simply because she elaborates that the stone tablets that contained all of the monsters is essentially the basis of what the card games is. Now, normally we know this, but she emphasizes that the cards are just a small little barrier between us and those monsters, meaning when the cards were printed, it actually allows there to be a connection to the real creatures of olden day. This is a perfect example of having cards in your deck that multiply. I don't have the ability to have a lot of cards with high attack stats, so using the multiplier cards in order to tribute summon pretty much allows me to stay in the game without having to build up my deck value to too high of a cost. Forest is a pretty balanced type, as not a lot of characters happen to have fire, but it's there at any given random time, just like this one. Now, Because I did keep certain specific cards in the deck, I actually have access to that random water right there. The light Skella Angel happens to be useful in one particular circumstance, and I really wouldn't have built this deck any better, personally, as the clouds, which are dark, happen to be really useful. Even if they're not gaining field advantage, it's still just a big body, and more often than not, they don't happen to have Dream, which is the counter to dark. There's that sound. So now we're going to head to the toy shop and find out that Joey has managed to get the last locator card. So the location we're going to is a stadium, and in the anime, this is basically where we get on a blimp in order to do some dramatic battles up in the sky. Everybody has to gather here at this location, and all we're waiting on is Merrick to show up. Now, the real Merrick isn't going to show up. He's here. But the stand-in fake Merrick, who is the final contestant in the finals. Everybody goes forward into this zone, and we have to talk to everybody at least once, and then the guard. Once you talk to the guard, everybody will load in and head up to the new location. Now, obviously in the show, when you're up in the air, you can't really do anything. You're pretty much locked in. But in the game, they've decided to let you go to the first floor, and you can actually exit the blimp and come back here. So at no point are you actually stuck anywhere. You'll always be able to leave, do whatever it is that you need to do, and then proceed more with the story. So after a small grind session against Bones, in order to get my deck capacity to be a little bit higher. So now we're going to head back to the blimp to continue the story and participate in the finals. So we're the one that's going to take on the false Merrick. This is where the duels get a lot harder, but it's also one of the few duels at the very end as well. You basically fight false Merrick, and then a bunch of cutscenes before Battle Island. So I'm going to keep this loss in, because this is just an example of how difficult the matches suddenly become, simply because he happens to have a field spell. And so I get outclassed very easily. This is the actual winning attempt. Because the fight is going to go the same way every time, you do have to go fight someone else in order to change how your hand and deck is going to play out, which also changes how your opponent plays. This ends up giving me a small advantage. I have to tribute no matter what, because I have to get over his monster stat line, and this will force the bigger creature to attack this time around. An interesting note about the story so far, Joey does have a sister, and she would normally be here on the blimp with them. However, she was cut entirely, so Joey having to fight and basically stay safe not only for his friend's sake, but for his sister's sake is gone. And I know they couldn't do it because of the game and the limitations, but this goes way underplayed because Joey actually survives the attack and almost had enough strength to play the last card to defeat him, and they didn't do any justice for that here. But he is defeated and is sent to the Shadow Realm, basically put in a coma. With her defeated, we have to talk to everybody and then talk to Mokuba in order to finally get to Battle Island. And here things change because instead of it being a four-way duel like in the show, or even just Yugi versus Kaiba, and then it's changed so that the protagonist and Yugi face each other because only the protagonist can face Merrick at the end, which means that Merrick faces Kaiba, and I would say Yugi is kind of a pushover, as his deck is kind of like what you'd expect, but it has weaker cards in it. And then, of course, Merrick would be the final checkpoint in the entire game, but also be the most difficult deck that you would have to face. It is possible, if you don't have a strong start, that he would eventually summon the Egyptian God card, and the Egyptian God cards do require 3 tributes. However, you will see shortly how that doesn't matter. A great Yugi start, but unfortunately Karibo doesn't do what he does in the anime, so... Jerry Beansman ended up being a late addition, I think before the previous fight, as I had enough room in order to add him, and he of course adds a great stat line of 1400. And in case he decides to try to bring out Exodia, I'm going to just say no. So far, I've had a lot of fun playing this game. I definitely did have an unorthodox deck, but the traps really did make the difference in most of the fights. I would recommend this game, and if it's something that's worth looking into, there are codes for all of the monsters that you can put in the system, and then even a secret code that you can put in that'll give you a free 100 points to your deck. But yeah, Kaiba goes down, leading the final match to be the protagonist versus Merrick. Enjoy. Also, as a side note, I love how Yugi still has his Millennium Puzzle, even though he was beaten. Also, how would the world end if he had 3 playing cards? You know, just wondering. Hey, you know what? This is my best card that I've always been offering. But you're not worth offering my best card. Hold on, let me dig around for a second. There we go. I'll offer you a Karibo. I don't know how more perfect my hand could have been, because I literally made it to where his monsters would not gain any field advantage, and had the Egyptian God card. His special effect is he blows up your opponent's side of the board, I believe monster-wise, and still does 4,000 points of damage. Oh yeah, and the coup de grace, you get to die to my Queen of Autumn. And that's it. That's Merrick taken care of. We are the finalists. We have won the entire tournament. The 500 grand that we were given is completely pointless, but thank you very much. And even this card is pointless because even though it's programmed in the system, it's the final fight. We are given the last remaining cutscenes of the game, and then it'll just hard end, where you would just, you know, turn off the system, turn it back on, and then either just replay from the last save, or just restart your game. And I would say at this point I would do closing thoughts. I'm thinking of doing at least 2 or 3 runs, because this game is not necessarily that long if you know what you're doing, and I'd already gotten a lot of the grinding out of the way. Now I know I could probably use cheat codes and stuff like that if I worked around to getting to that, but it's not really that worth it to me. I feel like it's a lot more fun to just play it organically, because they want you to grind and build up your stuff. Now, of course, Mogaba doesn't really want to say anything, but he does come back in and eventually say thank you, because my brother did wake up, which is pretty much the only nice thing he really does. Now, with peace and everything restored, we have to return the Egyptian god cards, and everything essentially goes back to normal. The only thing is that because we're the protagonist, the entire part of Yugi and Yami having to duel each other to basically put Yami to rest is not in this. It's just kind of a cookie cutter, hey, we're done, we're gonna have to go back to school, everything will go back to normal. which, I mean, is fine. They did do a sequel to this game, so they wanted to leave it open-ended, I guess, if it did well. And that is definitely going to be another project of mine, because I've never actually played the sequel, except for maybe like 5 seconds of it. Just did like the opening, and then for some reason just didn't go back to play it. But yeah, a couple of mechanics that I didn't really cover that is kind of a little janky in here is that if you go to play a card onto the field and there's already a card there, it overlaps it. And there was another moment where I was soft-locked because I ended up saving over a situation of I was in the ante window, and because I used the autosave on the most current file, I was forced to win a duel I felt like I couldn't win. So that was a little bit of a heartache, but I managed to pull out. Hopefully you enjoyed this playthrough. I know it was fairly long, but what I wanted to do was do a solid video of the entire game covering the general stuff that was going on, and then in the challenge videos I would probably shorten everything to kind of just the duels themselves. And maybe even cut out a few of the extra ones, like the Hollywood guy. If you have any suggestions or comments, definitely leave them. I won't be doing the next video for a little bit, so if you happen to have any suggestions as far as like the structure of the video, what you might want in it or want removed, stuff like that, I'll keep an eye out for. This is also the longest video that I've made and edited, so I do sincerely apologize if there was any jankiness to it, any weird cuts and stuff like that, because I was trying to make everything kind of as fluid as I could whilst dealing with small errors in recording. I happened to pause at certain moments and then didn't continue recording, so there was some backtracking. Also, this is just a temporary border. I wanted to make something simple in order to get the video up, and hopefully I'll have something a little bit more channel appropriate soon. But thank you for watching, and have a great day.